Mile marker 127 flashed past Mike Thompson's windshield when his CB radio died mid-sentence, cutting off another driver's complaint about the way station ahead. The sudden silence felt wrong on this empty stretch of Interstate 40, where truckers' voices are the only company for hundreds of miles. Mike reached for the volume knob, but before he could turn it, movement caught his eye in the side mirror. A figure in blue stood beside the guardrail, perfectly still against the desert landscape. Mike's foot moved toward the brake pedal automatically. In 30 years of long-haul driving, he'd seen plenty of stranded motorists, but something about this one made him slow down before he'd even decided to stop. The woman wore a simple blue dress that seemed untouched by the wind whipping across the highway. No broken-down car sat nearby. No luggage or purse in her hands. She simply stood there, watching his approaching truck with the kind of calm that made Mike's chest tighten with unexpected recognition. He pulled onto the shoulder, gravel crunching under 18 wheels. Through his passenger window, he could see her face clearly now, younger than he'd expected, but with eyes that seemed much older. She walked toward his cab with unhurried steps, and when she spoke, her voice carried easily over the engine noise. "Water," she said. "Could he spare some water?" Mike reached for his cooler without question, though later he'd wonder why he didn't ask where her car was or how she'd gotten stranded in the middle of nowhere. He handed down a cold bottle, and she smiled in a way that reminded him of someone he couldn't quite place. "Thank you," she said, but didn't drink. Instead, she looked directly at him with those ancient eyes and spoke words that stopped his breath completely. "Your daughter, Sarah," she said quietly. "Her confirmation is next month, isn't it?" Mike's hands gripped the steering wheel tighter. He'd never mentioned Sarah's confirmation to anyone on this route, never talked about his daughter to the dispatchers or other drivers at truck stops. The information sat in his wallet on a crumpled church bulletin he'd been carrying for weeks, unable to decide whether to attend. "How do you know about Sarah?" he asked, but the woman was already speaking again. "She needs her father there," the woman said, her voice carrying the same gentle authority his mother had used during childhood prayers. Then she began reciting words Mike hadn't heard in 20 years, words that made his throat close with recognition. "Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou among women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus." Those were his mother's exact prayer words, spoken every night beside his bed until cancer took her voice away. No one else knew the slight pause she'd made before Jesus, or the way she'd emphasized "blessed art thou" like a personal promise. The woman finished the prayer, placed the unopened water bottle on his truck step, and walked back toward the guardrail. Mike fumbled for his door handle, needing to ask how she knew, needing to understand what was happening. But when he climbed down from the cab, the highway stretched empty in both directions. He stood alone beside mile marker 127, holding the water bottle she'd left behind, feeling the desert wind that should have been moving her blue dress. His CB radio crackled back to life with a burst of static, and a voice came through clear as morning. "This is dispatch with a traffic update. Motorists report possible sighting of missing person near the shrine of Our Lady of the Highway, mile marker 130. All drivers use caution in the area." Mike looked at his odometer, then at the mile marker beside him. 3 miles ahead lay the shrine he'd passed countless times without stopping. Mike's cell phone rang as he pulled back onto the highway, the water bottle still warm from the mysterious woman's touch. The caller ID showed his ex-wife Linda's number, and his stomach dropped. She only called for emergencies. "Mike," she said, and her voice was shaking. "Sarah's been in an accident. You need to get to Memorial Hospital in Tucson right away." The words hit him like a physical blow. He swerved slightly, correcting as other trucks honked their warnings. Sarah was supposed to be at youth group, safe in the church basement, discussing confirmation preparations. "How bad?" he asked, already calculating the fastest route to Tucson, already pushing his rig harder than he should on desert curves. "They won't tell me everything over the phone," Linda said. She was conscious when the paramedics arrived, but Mike, her car, is totaled. Completely destroyed. I don't understand how she survived. Mike's throat went dry. The woman in blue had asked about Sarah's confirmation, had spoken his mother's prayers like a warning or a blessing. 3 hours ago, he thought the encounter was impossible. Now Sarah lay in a hospital bed, and the impossible was the only thing that made sense. "I'm 2 hours out," he told Linda. "Stay with her." He disconnected and pressed the accelerator, watching his speedometer climb past legal limits. Other drivers would understand. In the trucking world, family emergencies overrode every other rule of the road. His CB radio crackled again with traffic updates, but Mike wasn't listening anymore. He was remembering the woman's words about Sarah needing her father there, wondering if the prayer she'd recited was meant as protection or prophecy, and calculating exactly how many miles separated him from whatever waited at Memorial Hospital. Memorial Hospital's emergency room smelled like disinfectant and fear. Mike found Linda pacing near the reception desk, her face pale under fluorescent lights. When she saw him, relief flooded her features. "She's stable," Linda said before he could ask. "Broken ribs, concussion, but the doctors keep saying she should be dead. Mike, you need to see the photos of her car." A state trooper approached with a tablet showing twisted metal that had once been Sarah's Honda Civic. The entire driver's side was crushed inward. The roof collapsed to where the steering wheel should have been. No space remained where a human body could have survived. "She was wearing this when we pulled her out," the trooper said, holding up a silver chain with a small oval medal. "Miraculous medal," the paramedics called it. Said she was clutching it and praying the rosary when they found her. Mike stared at the medal, his chest tightening. 2 years ago, after Linda had died of cancer, he'd thrown away every religious item in their house. Sarah's first communion rosary, Linda's prayer books, his mother's old miraculous medals. He'd been angry at God for taking his wife, furious at prayers that went unanswered. "Where did she get this?" Mike asked. Linda shrugged. "She started carrying it a few weeks ago. Said someone at youth group gave it to her, but when I asked the youth pastor, he didn't know anything about it." The hospital chaplain appeared beside them, a gentle man with knowing eyes. "Your daughter asked me to tell you something," he said to Mike. "She said to tell her dad that the lady in blue kept her safe, just like she promised." Sarah slept fitfully under hospital monitors while Mike sat in the uncomfortable visitor chair, turning the miraculous medal over in his calloused hands. The chaplain had left prayer cards on the bedside table, but Mike couldn't bring himself to read them. A soft knock interrupted his thoughts. A Hispanic woman in her 60s stood in the doorway, holding a small bouquet of desert wildflowers. "I'm Maria Santos," she said. "I take care of a shrine up on Highway 40. I heard about your daughter and wanted to bring these." Mike recognized the name from trucker conversations. The Shrine of Our Lady of the Highway drew visitors from across the Southwest, and Maria was its heart. Drivers spoke of her kindness, her hot coffee on cold mornings, her prayers for safe travels. "How did you know about Sarah?" Mike asked. "Word travels fast among truckers," Maria said with a gentle smile. "But I also heard about your encounter at mile marker 127. The lady in blue doesn't appear to just anyone, Mike. She comes when someone needs to find their way home." Maria set the flowers on Sarah's bedside table and pulled up another chair. "My son Roberto was in an accident like this 5 years ago," she continued. "Drunk driver hit him, Heaton. Doctors said he wouldn't survive the night. I spent 3 days praying at the shrine, and on the 3rd day, a woman in blue appeared to me too." "What did she tell you?" Mike asked. "That Roberto's work wasn't finished," Maria said. "That he needed his mother's faith to carry him through. Roberto recovered completely, and now he helps me at the shrine. Sometimes grace comes through broken places, Mike." Over the next 2 days, while Sarah's condition slowly improved, Maria visited regularly with stories that challenged everything Mike thought he knew about coincidence. The shrine, she explained, had been built in 1952 after a trucker named Joseph Martinez survived a catastrophic brake failure on the same stretch of highway where Mike had his encounter. The statue was carved from what Joseph salvaged from his destroyed truck, Maria said. For 70 years, drivers have stopped there seeking protection. Some leave flowers, others just say a prayer before continuing their routes. Mike found himself listening despite his skepticism. Other truckers began visiting Sarah's room too, men Mike recognized from truck stops and way stations. Each carried similar stories of unexplained protection on dangerous roads. Big Jim Morrison showed Mike photos on his phone of an overturned trailer that should have killed him near Flagstaff. "I'd stopped at the shrine that morning," Jim said. "When that 18-wheeler crossed the median, something made me swerve at exactly the right second. The other driver died instantly, but I walked away without a scratch." Carlos Rivera described mechanical failures that resolved themselves after prayers at the shrine. Dave Peterson talked about a blizzard in Colorado where visibility dropped to zero, but somehow he'd followed taillights that led him safely to a truck stop that shouldn't have been visible in the storm. These men weren't religious fanatics or superstitious rookies. They were seasoned professionals who'd spent decades navigating America's highways. Men who understood the difference between luck and intervention. "Your daughter's accident happened at mile marker 130, Maria told Mike quietly. "The shrine sits at mile marker 130. She never made it past Our Lady's protection. On Sarah's third day in the hospital, her fever spiked dangerously high despite the antibiotics. Doctors spoke in hushed tones about infection risks and possible complications from her head injury. Mike watched monitors beep frantically while nurses adjusted for drips, feeling helpless in ways that 20 years of long-haul trucking had never prepared him for. Linda arrived with coffee and fear in her eyes. "The doctors want to do another brain scan," she said. "They're worried about swelling." Mike stood at Sarah's bedside, watching his 17-year-old daughter fight battles he couldn't help her win. Her fingers still clutched the miraculous medal, even in unconscious sleep. The same medal he'd thrown away in anger, somehow returned to protect his child when his own faith had failed. "I need to go somewhere," he told Linda. The shrine was exactly 3 miles from where he'd encountered the woman in blue, nestled in a grove of cottonwood trees that seemed impossible in the desert landscape. A simple wooden statue of Mary stood behind glass, her hands extended in welcome, her face carved with the same gentle authority Mike remembered from the highway. Maria was arranging fresh flowers when Mike arrived. She smiled without surprise, as if she'd been expecting him. "I don't know how to pray anymore," Mike said, the words coming out rougher than he intended. "I'm angry at God for taking Linda. I threw away everything that mattered to Sarah. I don't deserve help." Maria handed him a worn prayer card. "Grace isn't about deserving, Mike," she said quietly. "It's about needing. Your daughter needs you to remember how to hope." Mike knelt before the statue, holding the prayer card with shaking hands. The prayer card trembled in Mike's hands as he knelt on the worn wooden kneeler before the statue. The words felt foreign after 2 years of silence, but Maria's gentle presence encouraged him to begin. "Hail Mary, full of grace," he whispered, remembering his mother's voice guiding him through the familiar phrases. As he prayed, something extraordinary happened. The anger that had hardened around his heart like scar tissue began to soften. 20 years of highway stress, 2 years of bitter grief over Linda's death, decades of carrying burdens alone, all of it seemed to lift from his shoulders with each repeated prayer. The desert wind moved through the cottonwood trees with a sound like whispered blessings. Mike found himself crying for the first time since Linda's funeral, not tears of rage or frustration, but something deeper, cleaner. He prayed for Sarah's healing, for forgiveness of his own stubborn pride, for the wisdom to be the father his daughter needed. His phone buzzed insistently in his pocket, but Mike ignored it, lost in a peace he'd forgotten was possible. When he finally stood, his knees aching from the unfamiliar position, Maria was smiling through her own tears. "You should answer that," she said, nodding toward his phone. It was Linda, her voice bright with amazement. "Mike, you need to get back here." Sarah's fever broke completely. The doctors can't explain it. Her brain scan came back normal. "She's awake and asking for you." Mike looked back at the statue, Mary's carved face serene in the afternoon sunlight. He whispered thank you to both women who had guided him home. Sarah's recovery progressed rapidly over the following weeks, and Mike found himself making daily trips from his motel room to both the hospital and the shrine. Each morning, he helped Maria tend the small garden around the statue, pulling weeds and replacing wilted flowers with fresh ones donated by grateful truckers. The physical work felt like penance, but also like purpose. His hands, more accustomed to diesel engines and gear shifts, learned to handle delicate desert blooms with surprising gentleness. Maria taught him the names of different flowers and their meanings, how marigolds represented devotion and white roses symbolized new beginnings. Sarah noticed the changes in him immediately. "Dad, you seem different," she said one afternoon as they sat together in her hospital room. "Peaceful somehow." Mike showed her photos on his phone of the shrine, explaining about his encounter with the woman in blue, about Maria's kindness, about the community of truckers who had shared their own stories of protection. Sarah listened with growing wonder. "I want to see it," she said. "When I get discharged, will you take me there?" The conversation that followed surprised them both. Sarah shared her own recent struggles with faith, her questions about confirmation, her uncertainty about believing in things she couldn't see or understand. Mike found himself offering guidance he didn't know he possessed, words that seemed to flow from somewhere deeper than his own experience. "We don't have to understand everything to trust," he told her. "Sometimes we just have to be grateful for protection we never knew we needed." Sarah squeezed his hand, and Mike felt another piece of his broken heart healing. Word spread through the trucker network faster than Mike had expected. By Sarah's second week of recovery, drivers were stopping by the shrine specifically to talk with him. They came with stories of their own struggles, family problems, addiction battles, and spiritual emptiness that miles of highway couldn't fill. Tommy Rodriguez arrived one evening, his hands shaking from more than caffeine. He'd been driving for 18 straight hours, chasing deadlines that kept him away from his kids for weeks at a time. Mike listened without judgment as Tommy described the loneliness that was destroying his marriage. "I heard about what happened to your daughter," Tommy said. "How you found your way back to faith. I don't know how to pray anymore, Mike. I don't even know if God listens to guys like us." Mike remembered his own words to Maria about not knowing how to pray. He handed Tommy one of the prayer cards Maria kept stocked at the shrine, the same kind that had guided Mike through his first desperate prayer. "Start simple," Mike said. "Just ask for help. God's been listening to truckers on this highway for 70 years. They knelt together before the statue as the sun set behind the cottonwoods. Mike found himself speaking words of comfort he'd learned from Maria, offering the same grace that had been freely given to him. When Tommy left an hour later, his hands were steady and his eyes held hope. Other drivers began coming regularly. Big Jim brought his son who was struggling with addiction. Carlos asked for prayers for his wife's cancer treatments. Mike realized he wasn't just visiting the shrine anymore. He was serving there. 6 months after Sarah's accident, Mike organized the first annual truckers' pilgrimage to the shrine of Our Lady of the Highway. The idea had grown from conversations with Maria about creating a formal blessing ceremony for drivers and their rigs, a tradition that would honor the protection they'd all experienced. 47 trucks lined the highway's shoulder on that clear October morning, their chrome gleaming in the sunrise. Drivers from across the Southwest had taken time off their routes to participate. Some brought their families, others came alone, but all carried stories of highway miracles and answered prayers. Sarah walked beside Mike as he moved through the crowd, no longer needing the walker she'd used after leaving the hospital. Her confirmation had taken place 3 weeks earlier, with Mike proudly standing as her sponsor. The same miraculous medal that had protected her during the accident now hung openly around her neck. Father Martinez from the local parish had agreed to lead the blessing ceremony. He stood before the shrine with a bowl of holy water, speaking words that carried across the desert air with surprising power. "Bless these vehicles and their drivers," he prayed. "May Our Lady of the Highway watch over them on every mile, protect them from danger, and bring them safely home to their families." One by one, the truckers drove their rigs past the shrine while Father Martinez sprinkled blessed water on each windshield. Mike watched from beside the statue, his heart full with gratitude he could never have imagined feeling again. Sarah stood beside him, her hand in his, both of them witnesses to grace becoming tradition. 2 years later, Mike Thompson carried more than freight in his cab. Small bottles of blessed water from the shrine sat in his glove compartment alongside prayer cards and emergency phone numbers for struggling drivers. His CB radio crackled with requests for spiritual guidance as often as traffic updates, and truck stops knew him as the driver who always had time to listen. Sarah had started college, studying social work with plans to help families in crisis. She visited the shrine whenever Mike's routes brought him through Arizona, often bringing friends who needed to see the place where her father had learned to hope again. Maria Santos, now in her 70s, had officially made Mike a shrine coordinator. Together, they maintained the growing memorial wall, where truckers left photos and prayer requests, stories of protection and healing that stretched back decades. On quiet evenings, Mike would kneel before the statue where his transformation had begun, praying for the drivers he'd meet tomorrow, the families waiting for their safe return, the broken hearts that highway miles couldn't heal alone. Sometimes he remembered the woman in blue who had started it all, her impossible knowledge, her gentle command that had led him home. His CB radio buzzed with a familiar call. Eastbound driver needs assistance. Mile marker 127. Mike smiled, recognizing the location where Grace had first found him. He keyed his microphone and responded with words that had become his signature. "This is Mike Thompson. I'm on my way, and I'm bringing everything you need." The highway stretched ahead, full of possibility, and Mike drove toward whatever miracle waited around the next curve. Have you ever experienced unexpected help on life's highway, whether from a stranger, a prayer, or a moment of grace when you needed it most? Share your story of roadside miracles in the comments below.